So, the official translations are out for My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 309, and let me just say, there are some differences between the official translations and the fan translations that I really want to get into, particularly when it comes to the character of Izuku Midoriya and how his arms were able to survive the full throttle force of One for All in his fight against Shigaraki. But before that, let's hit the intro. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Big Blue Drew 97 here, coming at you with another My Hero Academia discussion. This time discussing the chapter of My Hero Academia, Chapter 309, I Can't Stay a Kid Forever. Well, more or less what the title of the chapter is. But yeah, when it came to this chapter, it was a really good chapter. I really did enjoy it because we really dived into the relationship between Deku and his mother, and how, for me personally, that can be a very relatable situation since, you know, I have a mother. But there is something that I want to talk about, particularly when it comes to the translations between the official translations as well as the fan translations, as well as diving into the idea of One for All changing Deku's body, both physically and metaphorically. And before we get right into that, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't done so, to subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you like these type of discussion videos, if you like My Hero Academia, subscribe to my YouTube channel because I talk about My Hero Academia, Vigilantes, hopefully getting more into Jujutsu Kaisen, as well as Dr.STONE. And if that's something that you're interested in, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I hope you'll enjoy it. And without the way, let's get right into the discussion. So, for the most part, there's a few different translations / interpretations of this chapter when it comes to a few pieces of conversation and dialogue. The first one that I really want to tackle is something that's actually very important and actually changes like how you view the situation. It specifically involves Tatami, Turtleneck, as well as Yoshindo, when it comes to their interactions with the civilians in the area, because from the initial translations, from the fan translations, it shows a situation where the civilians who didn't want to go with the heroes at first are now saying, okay, we'll help you take care of Yoshindo because, you know, he got wrecked by Muscular as well as his own quirk, and that, okay, we'll take care of him as long as you respect our boundaries, as like we'll help you with him, but you have to like respect that we want to stay here. That's what the fan translations say. But what the official translations say is completely different. They still want to help Tatami and still help Yoshindo, but now they're saying, yeah, you can't help him, you can't carry him on your own, so we'll help you. And while we're helping you with him, I guess we can actually hear you out. And that's very different because one translation is basically saying, yo, just leave us alone. And the other one is like, okay, we'll hear you out. And at first, I was all down for like, yo, we don't need your help. We can take care of ourselves, because it shows that society is still warped and it still like doesn't view heroes as like real protectors. But then the other one from the official shows that, okay, yeah, they're beginning to come around, which is something that I most likely predicted was going to happen at the end of this fight. So the official translations kind of proves that idea. But I thought that, oh, because they're going down that route, I thought that, okay, yeah, that's kind of like generic. That's kind of like predictable. But just because it's predictable doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense, because even in the situation they thought that they could defend themselves, they thought that they could take care of themselves, but then they saw Muscular. It makes more sense for them to realize, oh, we can't fight this guy. Yeah, I guess we need to rely on you pro heroes, because realistically speaking, if Deku wasn't around, most likely all of these civilians would have been killed off, and I think they may have just realized that. So realistically speaking, it just makes sense for them to begin to hear them out. And just because they hear them out doesn't mean that they'll necessarily go with them, but at the very least, they're being like compromising with them, and at least hearing out like Yoshindo, hearing out Tatami, and they still may not go with them. It doesn't specifically say that they'll go with them, it's just that now they're considering it. So that's like a really big difference between the official translation and the fan translation for this particular scene in general, because it kind of changes the tone and changes the conversation and changes the interpretation of like what these civilians are planning on doing. Either they're going to be completely defiant, or they're beginning to accept the help of the heroes once again, and those are two completely different situations. Another difference when it comes from the fans translations to the official translations particularly involves the scene where Deku leaves All Might and Deku is talking to Hawks on the phone. And when it comes to the fans translations, they basically, what Hawks is telling him is that, yo, you probably shouldn't be protecting Deku by yourselves. You may want to request help from us because the villains are still looking for him. And he's like, pretty high priority to make sure that whatever happens to him and whatever happens to Tartarus do not intersect. Basically, whoever broke into Tartarus is going to be dangerous. You can't do it on your own. That's basically what the fans translation is talking about. But what the official translation is talking about between Hawks and All Might is completely different. Like, the fan translation is like, yo, you need to stop protecting Deku on your own, which, when you really think about it, it doesn't make sense for All Might to only be the one helping Deku, because we saw that he's introducing the other pro heroes, specifically Hawks and Best Jeanist, into the fold by telling them about One for All. But in the official translations, they basically are saying, yeah, we need to make sure that Deku is safe. The people that broke into Tartarus could be going after them, and they have firepower, so we have to make sure that he's safe, so you can help rely on us to be able to provide you support. So basically, the difference is, for the fan translations, All Might is doing it on his own without the help of the pro heroes like Hawks and Best Jeanist and Endeavor. But in the official translations, All Might is all in for the help between the pro heroes as well as Deku and All Might. And the once again, when it comes to the official translations, that just makes a whole lot more sense within like the story that is being told. It wouldn't make as much sense for All Might to be doing it on his own without the help of the pro heroes, even though he's the one that introduced Hawks and Best Jeanist into the fold by telling them about One for All. So when it comes to the official translations, it just makes the most sense there in comparison to the fans translations, where it basically contradicts what the story is told so far. And before we get into like probably the major difference between the official translations and the fans translations, something interesting that I also want to bring up involves the conversation between Deku and Gran Torino in the official and official translations. When it comes to the unofficial fan translation, basically there's a whole lot of unnecessary dialogue and some added lines that do not appear in the official translations. Because in the fan translations, they basically have Gran Torino basically saying, yeah, I'm not dead, so I won't be able to see you, Nana Shimura. When in the official translations, that is something that isn't brought up at all. He doesn't like realize the fact that, yeah, I'm still alive, so I can't see you, Nana Shimura, which kind of sucks for me because it could show that they had a more personal relationship. Potentially they were in a relationship. Potentially Gran Torino and Nana Shimura are the child of Shimura's son. Yeah, maybe. But it kind of like, because that's not exactly what is in the official translations, that type of potential relationship isn't really hinted at through that dialogue. But pretty much after that, what he basically says is like pretty similar and can be summed up as, yeah, killing could be a form of redemption. It could be a form of salvation. If you kill someone, that could be a way of like saving them, in that type of ideal. But something else that is brought up in the actual official translations that isn't brought up in the fan translations is that Gran Torino regrets not making the killing blow. Meaning that when he tried to kill Shigaraki in that fight where, you know, Shigaraki basically crushed his leg and put a hole in his gut, that he attempted to kill him at that time, but he hesitated. And because of the hesitation, that could potentially lead to doubt inside of him and could have potentially led to Shigaraki still being alive now because he hesitated. That could also imply that maybe he has a relationship with Shigaraki. Maybe it's because of Shigaraki's relationship to Nana Shimura that he didn't take the killing blow. Or maybe it's because he didn't want to kill his own son. Or his own grandchild, to be specific. Possibly, but that's a unique difference between the dialogue. The unofficial basically brings up the idea of like, oh, he may have had a relationship with Nana Shimura because he's reminiscing about the fact that he can't join her in death. But then in the official translations, it brings up the idea that he couldn't kill Shigaraki, or he was unable to kill Shigaraki at that time, which, you know, could still imply that he may have a relationship with Shigaraki as a parental figure or grandparent, but it's less obvious in that sense in the official translations in comparison to the fan/unofficial translations. And now we get to the bulk of the translations that I want to really talk about, and the difference between the unofficial and the official translations. And it's particularly when we're talking about the flashback where Deku is still in the bed and we have Dr. Mario basically telling him about the injuries that he sustained. And here's where there are very similarities when it comes to the translations, except when we get towards the end, because you have the unofficial translation, which basically talks about how, when it comes to the injuries that you sustained, they aren't the same. But when it comes to the official translation, they say that, the injuries that you sustained are similar. Because in unofficial translations, they are talking about, in the past you talked about how they got a whole lot of damage and that these injuries are different. But in the official translations, they're pretty much the same, if not similar. But the explanation of like what is different about the situation is pretty much the same. That the injuries that he sustained in the first time he shattered both of his arms to oblivion is because there were like explosions or damages going on in the inside. While with these new injuries, the damages were going from the inside onto the surface. Basically, instead of just destroying his like body from the inside, it kind of like was destroying it from the outside, so he didn't get as much damage. And this is very consistent between both translations when it comes to this explanation. But the explanation that really differs is exactly when it comes to that 5% versus 45% panel for both, is that the unofficial translation says that both his anatomy and the injuries he sustained are different. But when it comes to the official translations, the anatomy, his body has changed, but the injuries have stayed the same. And in reality, I like the official translations a little bit more because, you could like write it off as like, these injuries are the same. No, sorry. You can write it off as the injuries are different and your body is different, but it seems to be more impactful to the idea that One for All is changing Deku's body if the injuries he sustained at 5% and now he's able to use 45%, which I think this kind of confirms that Deku's like either peak is now 45% or his norm is 45%, that because of that change, that even though he sustained the same injuries, One for All has changed his body to be able to sustain more of it. And this is very interesting because this ties into an idea/theory that I have when it comes to One for All and its connection to All Might. And when it comes to the theory that I have, it basically sums up as the moment that All Might dies, and when he dies, that Deku's body will fully acclimate to the quirk of One for All, which means that if All Might dies, then Deku's body will completely change to a point where he can use One for All at full force without doing any damage to his body. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we know for a fact that both Deku and All Might were quirkless. But I think the difference lies in who obtained the quirk first. Because I think that if you obtain the One for All quirk as a quirkless individual without it having be passed on to another quirkless individual, that it will fully acclimate to your body. Because when it comes to quirks, they're pretty much like tied to a person's genetics, and when you are born with a quirk, your body just naturally acclimates to it. For the same reason, for the most part, there are some exceptions to that, such as like Dabi and Aoyama, where their bodies like reject the quirk and the quirk doesn't really fit with their body. But for the most part, your quirk fits with your body. That is pretty much the explanation for why, even though you have someone who can like breathe fire, why their skin doesn't get burned, like Shoto, how he's able to use fire and ice, and that it doesn't immediately causes like frostbite or burn on him, is because his body is accustomed to it. Now, if he overexerts himself, then it'll do damage. But for the most part, most quirks don't do physical harm to the body because the body itself is acclimated to it because of like the genetics that are passed down. But when it comes to One for All, that is not the case. And even though Toshinori All Might was able to acclimate it to it easily, that could be because, and it is confirmed that it did become his quirk, and it just automatically acclimated to him because it was his quirk. But when he passed his quirk to Deku, One for All didn't automatically become Deku's quirk. It was still All Might's quirk, still Toshinori's quirk, passed down to Deku. And the reasoning why that it's beginning to acclimate to it could be just because over time, or it could be because All Might may be approaching the moment of death. And I think that it's still a very high possibility that once Deku fully masters 100%, whatever that may be, that may also be the moment where One For All acclimates to his body completely to a point where he can use it and it not fully wrecks his body. But I think that potentially, let's say that he reaches 75% in the same vein as Shigaraki and All Might dies. I think that because we've seen the flaming vestige inside of him not represent a corporeal form, like a physical form, and it always represents this like flaming vestige, and because One For All is also represented by this flaming vestige, and because All Might and All For One are still linked together, even though he already passed it on to Deku, and even though the embers inside of him have already diminished, I think that because of that link, that as soon as All Might dies, the flame will disappear, reform in the form of Deku, and therefore automatically adjust to Deku's body, changing it permanently to the same way that All Might's body was able to be a natural at it. So that's kind of like what I think is going on. And I think that when it comes to the official translation, it kind of leads more into that theory, because it means that the same injuries occurred, but his body has changed, solidifying that One For All is definitely changing his body, and that if All Might disappears, that it will permanently change Deku's body to a point where it can fully acclimate to One For All, and he's able to use 100% without any damage to his body whatsoever, in the same way that All Might was able to use One For All without it doing any harm to his body in the same way. But yeah, that's pretty much all I really have to say about this topic. I just really wanted to address like the differences in translations, as well as like readdress the theory that I have, because this kind of brings a little bit more evidence to the idea that when All Might dies, One For All will fully become Deku's quirk, and therefore allow him to use 100% without like destroying his body. And I think that that's a very interesting topic to really tackle, since many people argued and many people thought that there should be no way that Deku's arms should be functional at this moment. And I kind of like this explanation of it, because it still like plays into the idea of like how quirks are really weird and you really don't understand them, and how you can have quirks that like physically alter a person's body, allowing them to have a tail or extra limbs, but then also have the ability to change their physical appearance, and that physical appearance not be tied to the quirk. For instance, Tokoyami, whose quirk is Dark Shadow, but he has a bird head. It shows that when it comes to the quirks and the genetics, they have the ability to change a person's body to a point where it shouldn't work. Like, there's no like logical way that Tokoyami should have a bird head, but he does because of quirks, in the same vein that just because you have a quirk, it shouldn't be able to like physically change your body to a point where you sustain the same injuries, but then come out of it less harmed. So yeah, that's really all I have to say about the topic. What did you think of the chapter? Do you think that you prefer the official translations, or do you prefer the unofficial translations? And what do you think of the idea that when All Might dies, Deku will fully be able to master One For All and no longer have to worry about like breaking his body anymore? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you like. Leave a like on this video if you liked it. Hit the little notification bell. I'm gonna try to do this one time. Smash that like button. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!